My name is Gunnar Black. There isn't much time for me, and forcing myself to collect my thoughts in this notepad is the only way and the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Frankly, there isn't much time for anybody. But if you're reading this, then perhaps this isn't the apocalypse as it seems. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm new to the whole final days logbook sort of thing. Let me explain how it all started. Thinking back, I suppose, it was several weeks ago when all this trouble with technology began. It was just a minor inconvenience at first. I was watching some TV or playing some Team Fortress 2, when suddenly my computer would shut down. Other times I'd be cooking something in the oven, and it would turn off halfway through, leaving me with uncooked meatloaf. Pisses me off too, because I used to love meatloaf. I eventually called an electrician, who said that the wiring in my dorm was all in working order. Oh, that's right, if you couldn't put two and two together, based on where you found this thing, then you should know that I'm in the US Air Force. That's why I live in such a shitty dormitory. Budget cuts and is all that, I bitch about a lot. For anybody out there thinking that there is some huge government conspiracy, it's not. We're all screwed up at just the same. Either way, not really believing him, I called the base technicians. Everybody else said the same thing. I tried to use less electricity to give the wiring a break, but still the problems continued. On occasionally I would just leave everything off for hours at a time, and in just some hopes that the problem would go away. It didn't. Eventually I learned just to live with it, and just assumed that it was the old building, finally giving its death croak. Something that struck me as odd though. Some of the people in my unit began having the same experiences of events. One of my coworkers told me now her phone would simply die randomly, regardless of her battery, and come back to life minutes later. I learned that it just wasn't affecting me. It was affecting everybody. Several days later, similar stories were appearing on the news. They told us that the problem would be fixed. They told us that everything would soon be back to normal. They told us that everything would be okay. Even back then, I couldn't believe them. Many areas across the country, in fact the world, were suffering from these issues. Soon things took a turn for the worst. At this point, everybody was just getting used to the whole ordeal. One or two things not working at the time. It became a commonplace. It would just be a blender here, or a radio there. We learned all to adapt. Suddenly nothing would work, and everything would be off. This would go on for hours at a time. Civil unrest began to develop and the paranoia grew. There was no explanation. The media couldn't tell us why. Like they ever explained anything anyways, nor they could any electrician. Hell, couldn't even the tech experts to the base come up empty. People were complaining that their children had to go to school in complete darkness on some days until it was cancelled. What wasn't cancelled was my frickin' job. I couldn't do a damn thing without reliable power, but our commander still wanted us reporting to work. He probably just wants us to be there to make sure nobody's randomly died, but it was still a waste of time. What little power we had work just gave out entirely one day. This wasn't really bad. Most of the gates and doors to the base are electronically locked every time they closed. From what I've heard, some people were sealed in rooms for days on end. Next, the entire power plant started failing. Power lines were dead and almost everyone was out without power. Most schools and office buildings had backup generators. There were even a few private homes with some. They were working just fine and became a heaven of some sorts without us with the powering light. But it's just like everything else. They began to stop, and there wasn't some massive explosion or flurry of sparks. In fact, nothing technically broke. By all accounts, there was no reason for them to stop. Finally, absolutely everything shut down, even when things that still should have worked. Cars, watches, two-way radios, even solar-powered flashlights. Some people thought that it could have been a large-scale EMP attack, but EMPs have their own effects hit us all at once. They don't roll out over the course of the week or two. Not like this. There's nothing like this. When the lights stopped turning back on, people began to lose it. No amount of token solutions or false promises would help anyone anymore. The media blackout is what already started to set civilization over the edge. Nobody knew everything. Not even the government had the ability to try to soothe our fears anymore. Our commanders tried everything to get the base back into populace out under control with no real results. Really? How could they expect to gather us all in one place? All communication was gone. I still went to work though. I couldn't do anything without power except walk to the front door. It was the only kind of stability I really had left in that point. Some of my friends felt the same, so the 9 to 5 became the time to pretend things were almost normal for a few hours, who still clocked in. Eventually, the mental breakdowns began. People started screaming that they were hearing or seeing things. My coworker, who had his desk across from mine, must have had it bad. She completely lost it and began to attack random people with a knife. We managed to stop her before anybody died, except for when she killed herself, the second we looked the other way. Society began to collapse. Electronics were a necessity to this day and age, and it kept the human race connected in a communication way. Based off my late coworker, it also kept our sanity good and healthy. A lot more people seem to have lost it as well. Without power, we're just fucked. I stopped going to work. Nobody was really going anywhere after since then. No vehicles were functioning. People stayed at home hoarding food and water while taking care of those who were losing their minds. The local government shut down. Water stopped running. Garbage was everywhere. Sewers bubbled to the surface. The sick got sicker. Corpses piled up. Wild animals started taking over the streets, as if it was mankind that thrust 500 years back. During this day, only time would tell when lights was low, and I saw an airman collapse onto my lawn. I rushed out to help him, but as soon as I got near him, he started screaming and thrashed about. "The lights! We need the lights!" he yelled. I was afraid to approach him, and for a good reason, since his screams only got more frantic and less sane. They'll come again, again. The sky is wrong, the dark is wrong, the light is wrong, all wrong, all wrong, all wrong. That really stood out to me. What did it mean? I hoped it was just some outcry out of broken mind. I learned the truth soon enough, though. His ramblings got even more and more delirious to the point where he simply began screaming for several minutes. For one reason or another, the screaming stopped, and he was dead. The closer I got, I noticed some sort of cut on his chest. It was deep, very deep. What was odd was the coloring. The wound on the surrounding area was dark, nearly black, and there wasn't much blood. It almost looked like it could have been burned, but it also looked like a clean cut as well. I've never seen anything like it. I didn't want to leave him on my lawn, but I still couldn't call security forces. I've never seen him on the base before, and I ended up dragging him to the security squadron a few blocks down. Even though I knew nobody would be there, most abandoned their post and went to their families. Those with greater sense of duty, or those with corpses stacked on their parking lot. I suppose giving in the dead to our police for them was just sort out, wasn't a wholly unique idea. By the time I made my way back home, the sun was setting. I felt my hair stand on end as I was rushed to my room, slamming the door shut behind me. The fall of mankind was interesting to watch. After 2 weeks without power, the huge changes had occurred. The federal government was all but gone. Some in power still maintained the laws, but with no way to enforce them. It was a wasted effort. The police force had disbanded after only a few days. We in the military didn't fare much better. Nobody do their job anymore. The only reason that they were still on base was because of many, and it was our home. Off base was an utter archery. A few times I ventured off. I feared for my life. There were houses with boarded-up windows and with their dogs chained to their front lawns. There were thugs armed with knives and bats, looting and violating as much as they pleased. Corpses were fairly commonplace in the streets, with some heads bashed in, some with stab wounds, some with deep gashes, like the man on the front lawn my lawn had, and a few mangled beyond all recognition. Those were the ones that made me worry. I wonder how a human being could do such a thing to destroy a person so thoroughly. No inch was left untouched. It just became too much for me. The sight of those bodies shattered my view of humanity. One final supply run, I stopped leaving my room. It was break time for me. Depression, thoughts, the works. There were still people trying to live their lives around me. Some people were insane, some were ruthless, and others were in denial, believing that somehow things would turn around. I ignored them all. After seeing what I thought to be the worst of mankind, I wanted nothing more to do than anybody else anymore. One afternoon I found another body in front of my room, headless this time. I dragged it far enough away that flies wouldn't be attracted near my room. I couldn't care less otherwise. I wondered the sins he had committed this time without a light. Murder? Arson? Indulge in something else? Without power we were reduced savages in less than a month. Most of us know better than the flies that fester around corpses that were created. An hour later I was drifting off to sleep. I couldn't do much in those days, but then I heard it. It was a blood-curdling scream, coming from a room a few rooms down. While the screams were a common thing, that one was different. The screams I was used to for those insane. Fear was either abandoned or embraced in some time ago for the majority of the people. It would take something utterly shocking to stir up the true fear again, and I couldn't imagine what would cause it. I shot up in bed and ran as fast as I could to where I thought the scream could come from. A few others joined me to see what was wrong. I ended up in front of the neighboring dorm, but now there wasn't any sound coming from it. One of the guys who had decided to help me check it out. He tried bashing down the locker with little success, and went through the window instead. The darkness of the room seemed to swallow him in an instant he disappeared into the black. A few seconds later we heard a scream. We also heard something new. We heard the noises of flesh being torn from bone, and human laughter, of blood hitting the walls, and then sickening silence. The moments following that were in a panic-induced blur. I sprinted as fast as I could to my bedroom. I took another second to glance out my window, and that all I needed to forever burn the image was of a nightmarish creature into my skull. I remember its bright white eyeballs. I remember its gourd-covered teeth. I remember this seemingly formless black body, matching the night as it dwells. Now that you're all caught up, I'm still in my room now. I spent the last few hours writing the downfall of mankind for sanity's sake, while listening to the sounds of screaming, yelling, ripping, tearing, crunching, and horrifying silence. I locked my door, but knowing how this shithole dorm was built, I might as well left it wide open. The smart ones are hiding too, waiting for their rooms and praying for the day. The rooms on the streets, the ones on the streets getting slaughtered, some idiots even trying to fight them off. About an hour ago I noticed something interesting, even if it was all for naught at this point. From the safety of the room I watched a combat outside. Physical contact didn't seem to affect me as the creatures in the slightest. Physical blows just seemed to go right through them. A desperate cry from a man outside grabbed a dry branch and lit it with the match. Immediately all the creatures backed away from him. Realizing that he was on something, he sprinted as fast as he could towards one of the beings. Unable to flee fast enough, it bellowed an unworldly scream and vanished into nothingness, leaving nothing but a smoking scorch march on the ground. Of course luck was on the man's side of this night. A storm had been brewing all day. It had finally unleashed its payload, an unrelenting fury. His flame dimmed and died within seconds, leaving him to this grisly fate. I turned away. I've seen enough for those deaf in his night. I have the hard time to think too. This is why we were afraid of the dark, isn't it? These beings are the dark, the night, the pitch blackness. Have they always been there? There is no way to know, but it makes sense. Light kills them. That's why they didn't attack during the day. Cyanic light must have killed them as well, or else we would have seen them before. The ravaged bodies that I sawed off base, the black gashes on some, Could they try to be the result of the monsters? I'll just pretend that the answer is regardless of the truth. No point spending my last few minutes on despising my own species. On the other hand, if light kills them so easily, then why don't the moon or stars have any effect on them? Is it because the moon and stars are the creatures of the night as well? Why didn't they attack in the few weeks leading up to tonight? Well, I suppose they must have, but not such force. They were simply biding their own time, or unsuspecting failing of technology, as surprising them was it to us? In fact, we were all this time? All these questions, I wish we had time to learn of them. If we did, we may have stood a chance. If I can hold out for a few more hours, daylight will come. Maybe then help will come. If they are unable to attack me for a dozen hours or even more, I'll be safe, but what probably won't happen, since I can hear them right outside now. They're coming for me, and that locked door isn't going to hold them off. I'm going to suffer the same fate as those people outside. What help could anyone give at this point? We have nothing. No light at all. Perhaps the other survivors and I... who am I kidding? If these creatures can make it to the military base, then there's little else they can reach. They're clawing at my door now. I can hear them raging over the storm outside. They are laughing? Is this a game to them? I've got my knife to my left, but what good would that do? Forcing myself to write all this down that's what's keeping me from going onto a flow-on panic. I could see one breaking through now, rain pouring into the flesh on my door. Its flashing teeth at those. Forget the knife. Why bother? I knew that I wouldn't be free of this bullshit easily. I thought it was the end. I would have been too if it hadn't been for that flash of lightning and ensuing thunderstorm. One bolt of energy was all it took, and those creatures were destroyed in seconds. It's dawn now, and the rest of the abominations crawled off into whatever void they dwell in to hide from the light. I step outside to view the aftermath. Limbs and mangled bodies were everywhere. Blood decorated the walls and windows of most of the rooms. Doors were ripped off their hinges, and windows were shattered. The carnage only ended when the storm picked up, and they left their damn scorch marks on the ground. I managed to count 17 scorch marks. 17th of those freaks had died because of one single lightning strike. Some would call this victory. Me? Not for so much. For all I know, there could be millions of them, and they could be back tonight. That I was sure of. I need time to figure out what to do. It won't storm forever. I need a plan. Writing is not a priority this day. Doesn't help that I'm on the last page of his notebook. Stay safe in the night light. Stay together. Gunnar Black, 2019.